Hi, and welcome again to the show. I'm Leslie Choice, and my guest today is playwright and novelist Don Hanna. He's the author of The Wise and Foolish Virgins, and also more recently, Ragged Islands, a novel. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
Let's go right into the new novel, Ragged Islands, first. Susan Ann Roberts is 85 years old. Aside from the fact that she's rather old, where is she in her life?
Well, physically, she's in a hospital in Toronto, and she's at the end of her life. She's been forced to leave her home in the East and move into a seniors apartment in Toronto. But she's, she basically decides over the course of early in the book that she's kind of fed up with where she is, and she decides she's going to come back to the East and go to those places that where she lived when she was a young girl and where she raised her family.
Now, describe her memories of where she grew up. What did it look like? What did it sound like? What did it smell like?
She's really longing for a place, in part, that kind of no longer exists. I mean, in the same way that when I look back on where I came from in New Brunswick, I'm sort of thinking about a place that existed in the 1950s and 60s and kind of isn't there anymore. It's pretty much nature. It's nature-oriented, you know, in terms of how she feels about the place. It's the land, the lay of the land, the being close to the sea, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it sounded like a beautiful place that you described. Now, when she was born, her parents gave her away, and how does, I guess we shouldn't say why or anything quite yet, but how does that affect her whole life?
She was raised by an aunt. She was given to her paternal aunt, her father's sister, and had a very happy childhood. I mean, raised by people who really loved her, and I think on some level she really understands that she had perhaps a happier childhood because of that than if she'd stayed with her birth mom. And she knows her birth mom and knows that family. But at the same time, there's this sort of thing nagging at her, a kind of sense of unwantedness, like why me? Why my older and younger siblings weren't given away? Why was I singled out? And I think this is one of the driving forces in the book is she, before she dies, she wants to try and figure that out.
Yeah, that seems to be a theme that I've heard a lot from adopted children or adults who had been adopted when they were young. Even though there was very often not the case of any real personal rejection, but there's this feeling that goes through people's lives. Have you talked to people who are adopted, or?
Well, I mean, my mom was in exactly the same position, and I was attracted to, I wrote a play about Lucy Maud Montgomery, who is the same sort of thing. I mean, Lucy Maud Montgomery's mom died, and her father gave her to her maternal, God, I get so confused with this, which grandparents they were. So she was raised by her grandparents. And Montgomery had that nagging sense of unwantedness all her life, which sort of compelled her to write about orphans. She wrote obsessively about orphans. And on some level, the play that I was trying to write with Wooden Hill, which I was never very happy with the end result, it wasn't the play that I wanted. This book became that sort of story of an older woman at the end of her life trying to figure things out. And that's, it came from sort of those are my two primary sources, I guess, you know. Stories my mother, and comments from my mother when she was living, and from reading old L.M. Montgomery.
Okay, interesting combination. Now, what were Susan Ann's, your character in the book, what were her adoptive parents like?
Fabulous, fabulous people. I mean, really, she thought that her aunt, who became her mother, because she called her Mom Wellman, walked on water. I mean, just a saintly person. And her adoptive father, a great, great guy.
Okay. And what did she like herself as a little girl, feisty little girl?
I wouldn't say feisty. I mean, she was quite sickly. She had pleurisy. So that was a factor. And when she was a child, the pleurisy, all of that bred into the sense of her unwantedness and her unworthiness, and you know, they wanted her even though she was sickly, and all of those things. I
know that term, but to tell you the truth, I don't exactly know what kind of disease that is. So I guess I'm not alone. It must have been.
Well, I'm probably the only person you'll ever meet who had pleurisy. I had pleurisy. My mom had pleurisy when she was a kid, and I had pleurisy. When I was a kid, it was called empyema. The lung fills up with fluid, essentially, and collapses, and you can't breathe. It's like drowning.
Now, at 85 years old, she's taking this journey into her past. What exactly are we to make of that? Memory, hallucination?
Well, really what it is, I keep saying the book is sort of an investigation of where the mind goes when the body starts to shut down. And I know that when I was with my mom when she was in hospital at the end of her life, one day she said to me, it's in the red box. I had no idea what she was talking about, and I had no idea what box she was talking about. And I thought, I have no memory of a red box at all. So that I thought, does this red box sort of exist somewhere in her head? I mean, this could be a red box that, you know, was like thrown in a fire in the 1920s, you know? So the journey she goes on and the memories that she has are of that order, of she's sort of roaming freely throughout her past. And I wanted the reader to always know where she is, so that the reader goes on that journey with her. And it's kind of, I mean, in this journey she goes on, she walks from Nova Scotia, essentially from sort of the Moncton area in Shediac to down near Lockport. So it's kind of an impossible journey for an 86-year-old woman to have.
Feels real to her, though.
It's real to her, and I think it feels real to the reader. Yeah. And the people that she meets along the way are all people from her past. Mm-hmm. Some of whom have long since left the earth. So it's someone said the other day it was magic realism. I went, oh God, I guess it is. Although that wasn't my intention at all. It was just to make the journey she's going on in her head really concrete for the reader.
Yeah, yeah. And magic realism is not a bad term, but I bet you don't like being categorized with labels. You know, like we writers, we try to avoid that.
No,
you know, maritime Gothic. Somebody called you.
Oh yeah. But who wants to be the maritime magic realist? Not me.
Yeah. My guest today is Don Hanna, and we'll be right back after this.
This program is presented as a public service by Mount St. Vincent University.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Leslie Joyce. My guest is Don Hanna. You've mentioned a little bit, but tell me a bit more about what you were drawing on to create this character and her situation.
I guess some family stories. I mean, it's not a sort of a biographical thing at all, but old stories from my family, from my mom and from my aunts, and my love of the land here, because I mean a lot of her journey is all about where she is. You know, the Tantramar Marsh or the Wentworth Valley, and it was a chance for me to write sort of descriptively about places that I'm crazy over. Other than that, I don't know, it's just, once the book gets going, I have no idea anymore what sort of spurs it on. It just has this kind of a life of its own.
Your character takes over and writes it for you?
Well, in surprising ways, some things do happen like that, I find, yeah.
Yeah, I certainly believe in that. Now, back to Susan Ann here. She marries a man named Jamie, I believe, and they live at a place called Ragged Islands. What is their life like?
The most ordinary of lives. I think that, you know, he works in the office at a fish plant. She has a family. They're, you know, lower middle class folk, blue collar people. I thought it was really important for me to write a play about. I wanted to write a play about an extremely ordinary woman, you know, who when we look at her life, we see it in kind of big mythical terms and in magical terms, so that she seems by the end, I think, quite extraordinary. I think. Yeah,
because there's the challenge now, and I heard to hear you slipping back between play and novel. The two must be so interchangeable in your head, aren't they?
Yeah.
This
yeah.
business of it. No, it's
did
interesting.
I say play?
Actually. You did. You did. And
there I go.
But it's kind of cool, and you know, I think that in a few minutes when we come back after commercial, we talk about the whole business of creating a good scene, because it's so essential in novels, and a playwright might have a bit of a, you know, a little hand up there. But the problem you created for yourself for a novelist was the idea of you're using the word ordinary. That's the hardest thing to do, is to write an interesting, successful, dramatic novel about an ordinary life.
Right.
How does one do that?
Well, I just think looking at it in terms of trying to see it from her point of view, because I mean, I don't think any of us think, oh, I have such a boring, ordinary life. You know, we all think we have extraordinary lives, because we do. I think each individual person does. So it was just a matter of getting inside her head and trying to figure that out, how she would see herself.
Right. Now, he dies before she does.
He dies quite young. He's in his 60s.
And how does that affect her?
Well, she's on her own for a long time. And her, of course, as is the case with so many families out east, I mean, her kids grow up and leave. I mean, they go west. And so she's, I think, sort of has a period of time here where her families come back in the summers and she gets to know her grandchildren that way and she goes to visit, but she's pretty much on her own. So then the big decision ultimately is made for her that she has to leave. She has to sell her house and move to Ontario.
Okay. We're going to take a short break. My guest today is Don Hanna, and we'll be right back after this.
If you'd like more information about this or any of the programs we produce at Mount St. Vincent University, call us or email. We welcome your comments.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Leslie Joyce. My guest is Don Hanna. We're talking about his novel, Ragged Islands. But you were a playwright before you were a novelist. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering why the playwright puts down that particular pen to pick up the word processor or whatever and carry on with pages in a book.
A couple of reasons. I was fed up with the theater. I mean, that's always a good reason. I just wanted a break from the theater. But also at the time I was working on a play that just didn't work. It was this, I had decided I'd write this play it had two characters. There was an older man, and he had a younger man tied to a bed. And nothing happened. I mean, like, it was just, and the younger guy refused to speak. So that was the stupidest play ever. And I sort of labored over it for a couple of years, and it was, you know, the old guy kept talking and talking and talking. And ultimately I thought, well, what'll happen if I just try to write this in prose? And I also thought at the time it would sort of be a useful thing, because I was fed up with the theater, to maybe try and reinvent myself a bit as a writer. So it became The Wise and Foolish Virgins. That became my first book. Yeah.
And I think of, you know, like playwriting is very much this group thing. You create something on your own, and everybody's all over you to change it and do this and to work with the actors and all that. And a novel is a fairly solitary business. You have to deal with editors eventually, but otherwise it's, you know, you sit down in a room and you write.
Right. And I think that playwriting needs to be more of that. I mean, I've come to this big conclusion that, I mean, I was just amazed with the novel that I mean, an editor isn't interested in even talking to you until you've finished it. Whereas with a theater, I mean, I could go to a theater with, you know, I'd say 20 pages of a play and say, I'm sort of interested in this, and yeah, and suddenly there everybody is with their hands on it. So I've been sort of running around, and that's all called dramaturgy, this great, you know, the art and science of dramaturgy. So I've been doing a talk called Dramaturgy, Threat or Menace, just because I think it can be so harmful. And I'm adamantly saying that I think all playwrights have to get to the end of their first draft before they open the door and let these nosy Parkers in to mess around.
I know what you're talking about. Now, what are the skills, though, that you developed as a playwright that you bring to fiction that maybe are different from people who have been writing fiction primarily through their careers?
With lots of dialogue. I mean, you know, everyone opens the book and goes, oh, there's a lot of dialogue. I mean, there is a lot of dialogue. I think when you're a playwright, you really have to learn how to be concise, because you don't have a lot of time, and you have to really pare things down. So, I mean, I think with my first book, I kind of went hog wild in the opposite direction. I had, you know, 12 characters, and it was really kind of a fat thing.
Yeah, you went for the freedom of I can do anything.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't cost anything.
Exactly. Yeah, no one has to pay these actors.
Right.
But I think, well, concision probably is the best way to put it in terms of what I would bring as a playwright.
Now, when did the writing urge grab you?
Well, I guess when I was in high school and writing just, you know, poor me, lousy poetry, you know, that I guess then.
We all have to go through that phase.
Well,
it's okay.
Unfortunately for us, yeah. Or for anyone who has to read it, yeah. But that's when it started. In the sort of mid-'60s.
Right, right. Yeah, we were talking about labels. Someone else had labeled you maritime gothic, I think, for your first novel, right?
Yeah.
Was that the term applied there? And I thought, gee, is there such a thing? Or is this a good thing or a bad thing now to have a category?
Well, I mean, with that book, too, it was also like the maritime version of the Southern novel, which, and I think that's where the gothic thing came from. But that I didn't object to because, I mean, Southern fiction, American Southern fiction, always spoke loud and clear to me, and I think there is a real similarity between the South and the East.
And it's usually quite dark. I didn't exactly see Ragged Islands as being a dark book.
I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't. You wouldn't go, oh, it's a fun read, but but it is a fun read, and it's ultimately it's moving towards a place of sort of consolation, I think. So it's not. I mean, my plays are pretty much darker than this, I have to say.
Right. And what do you want your reader to be left with at the end of your book? I mean, what kind of a feeling or what kind of not the summing up in one sentence or anything like that. I just mean, you do want your reader to walk away with something.
Yeah. Well, I guess that sense of consolation would be great. A sense of how worthy it is to live. And to be, and I think also to have a life where one feels that they're a part of the natural world, because I think that's something that is just, I find, incredibly disappearing, if that's a stupid sentence, but disappearing from the, from I know with kids that I know at U of A, where I am now, that they have no sense of the land or where their food comes from or any of that stuff. And I think that it was really important for me writing this book that we understand how profound her connection is to place, because I think it's a big deal.
Very good. My guest today is Don Hanna. We're going to take another very short break, and we'll be back right after this.
If you'd like more information about this or any of the programs we produce at Mount St. Vincent University, call us or email. We welcome your comments.
Welcome back to the show. I'm speaking today with Don Hanna. We've been talking about his novel, Ragged Islands, and other things. Now this is your second novel. Was the second novel easier or harder than the first?
This was misery, I have to say. This was a really hard book to write.
Why?
Because, the first one was, I wrote the first draft in a year, and I ran around shooting off my mouth saying, this is so easy, it's easier than a play. Everyone should write a novel, because it really was, for some reason. This was really difficult, in part to find the structure, trying to figure out how to put this book together. But also, I quit smoking after the first draft. So I spent...
Wow, that's got to figured into the process.
Yeah, 2 years of being just stupid and having no concentration whatsoever. So that extended the process a lot. But this was really a long haul, and yeah, it was smoking, I guess.
It's a tough one. You always envision the old classic view of the writer, from the 50s or something, with the glass of scotch in one hand and the big ashtray full of cigarettes and things. You can't quite do that anymore and live very long, can you?
Well, I mean, I could never manage it with a glass of scotch for sure, but it was mountainous cups of coffee and smokes and.
Right.
Yeah, well, those days are over.
Very different tangent here. I noticed that you had worked with inner city kids, preschool and elementary, and I wonder what you learned from that experience and if that found its way into your fiction at all.
Well, basically, I mean, the first play I ever wrote came out of that experience. I was working in Regent Park in Toronto, and the demographics of Regent Park have changed drastically. Back then, most of those kids were from the East Coast. I mean, they're sort of people who went to Toronto and ended up sort of living in the wrong part of town and on welfare. And there was a kid I adored. I mean, I met him when he was, I guess, 4, and when he was 6, his mom killed him. It was an incredibly sort of big, tragic thing, and a story that I kind of didn't know what to do with. I mean, it just really haunted me. And after a couple of years, my first play became a play about a mom like that, like a young, sort of illiterate, kind of unemployable, angry, alcoholic mom who loves her kid but just can't cope. So I became a writer basically because of that job.
Now, it seems to me then your interests in writing are very much about the very young and the very old. Is there any reason for that?
I have no idea. But that sounds, I guess that's, yeah. Well, right now I'm writing a play for the students at U of A, and I made a decision that everyone in the play is going to be between the ages of 20 and 24, so I guess that is pretty young to me now.
But you're still going more.
But yeah, I guess I have an obsession with history, I guess, and maybe there's something about being at those opposite ends of the spectrum that's useful. I don't know.
Okay. And the scene, you're the playwright and you're the novelist. And when I teach creative writing there at my class at Dalhousie University, I try to explain, you know, like the way you create the novel, you have to do it scene by scene. If you write a great book, it's filled with great scenes. How do you write a great scene?
You rewrite it, I guess. I think that you figure out what you want to write, and then you keep. For me, writing is all about rewriting, so it's exploring it and exploring it and exploring it. And sometimes it becomes something really important that you want, and sometimes ends up on the cutting room floor. But I mean, the only answer I can give is rewriting, I guess.
Are you very aware of pacing in fiction in the same way that you would be in a stage play?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. One of the things I do is, I mean, I read out loud a lot. I have to read it out loud. And when I get to the end of a draft, I have to read the whole thing out loud in one go from beginning to end. So it's like, with a book, I get up at 6 in the morning and I read it straight through till wherever, midnight. That seems to be important to have, so that I can have a sense of how it all plays, as one piece. And I also pin pages up on the wall in sequence, so I kind of need a lot of wall space.
You like the visual element of
Yeah, I have to, yeah, it's a really
stage
important
directing.
thing for me. Yeah, it is. Or I lay it all out on the floor and walk around, and that's really how I figure out pacing.
Interesting. So have you forgiven the theater? Will you go back and write another play or write another novel? Where are you headed?
Yeah, as soon as I wrote my first novel, I went out and wrote a play and directed it, and I was very happy. And I've been working on a play the last few years set in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia in the late 18th century that I'm a play I'm just obsessed with, a story I'm obsessed with. And once I finish at the U of A with the play I'm writing there, I'll go back to that.
Okay, and where does Susan Ann Roberts there, your 85-year-old character in that, where does she go once you've finished your novel?
You want me to give the ending away?
No. Where does she go for you?
Oh, where she go for me?
Character. I mean, sort of
Oh.
like, are you done with her? Is she there? Or is she still a voice floating around in your head?
Oh no, she's gone. I think. Yeah, I'm not much interested. I think once it's done, it's done. I think that's one thing that's important for me is that I figure that with whoever I'm writing about, I have a limited amount of time and space to figure out everything I know about that character and everything I want to say about that character. So when it's done, I think I'm kind of finished.
Sure. Okay.
I hope I am.
And Don, thanks for coming on the show and joining
my
us
pleasure.
today.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for watching. I'm Leslie Choice. I'll see you again next time.